You're listening to episode 102, Betsy's story, Hope for HIE, Hypoxic Ischemic Encephalopathy. Hello, my friends. I'm so happy you're here for our second episode of 2022, and I've been waiting for a while to share this one with you, so I'm so glad that I get to do that today. Today, I'm introducing you to Betsy, and she is from an organization called Hope for HIE, and I originally learned about this actually working in a NICU here in Austin, Texas. And HIE is when an infant has a brain injury, and Betsy will kind of get into more of the more specifics about what her son, Max, actually went through. But it's an amazing organization that supports parents who are dealing with this completely unknown territory with their teeny tiny babies. And I've always just been in awe of the organization because I think it's so well run. I think that their social media is just so great, and they do a great job supporting parents. Like, they have this box that gets sent to the hospital, and it's just a coffee mug and information about HIE. So I'm so excited about sharing this episode with you today. Betsy, I'm so honored to have you here, and let's get to your story.
My name is Betsy Pilon, and I currently serve as the Executive Director for Hope for HIE, which is a small nonprofit that, the goal is to move forward awareness, education, and support for families whose children have been impacted by neonatal or pediatric acquired HIE, which is Hypoxic Ischemic Encephalopathy, which is a mouthful, and it's a type of brain injury.
Yes, it is definitely one of those medical terms that needs another thing to be called, because the whole full name is just, like you said, a mouthful.
It's very overwhelming, and essentially it's lack of oxygen, restricted blood flow impacting the brain. So some sort of event that is caused either in utero or around the time of birth, or sometimes in childhood, near SIDS events or interrupted. We do also help families whose children have had non-fatal drownings and things like that, who might have a similar trajectory as a lot of our families.
Gotcha. And you are in Michigan, that's correct?
Yes. Yep. I'm right outside of Detroit. And I'm married to a wonderful guy named Mike, and have two children, Max, who's 9, and Emily, who is 5. And Max is my HIE kiddo.
Okay, gotcha. So we'll probably be talking about Max a good bit today, but as it does in many other conversations with parents, Emily will probably has been affected, kind of just about your mission in life and moving forward, and being mom to Max and Emily together is a pretty specific role that you have. So, but why don't we start off just talking about kind of Max at the beginning and what kind of started this whole journey into HIE with you all?
Sure. So I got pregnant very easily with our first child. We kind of just decided it was time, and, had really excellent prenatal care, was cruising along in my pregnancy. And about 36 weeks, I noticed a change in movement that was concerning to me. So I had called into the clinic, and they had said they instructed me about kick counts, and he passed. And then they, had scheduled me to come in for an in-clinic ultrasound. So I did that, and everything, looked fine. And then a couple of days later, I noticed that my stomach had gone from like hard and kind of active to very soft and flaccid. And so I called labor and delivery because it was on late Sunday night. And they said, well, try kick counts. And if, something doesn't seem right, feel free to just come in. So I tried kick counts, and nothing was going on. And so we weren't really concerned at that time, but we thought we'd be the parents. I would go in, and, I was probably, overly concerned because it's my first pregnancy, and that we'd be the parents that get sent home. But that was not to be the case. So we went in, and they hooked me up to the monitors and found that Max was in distress. So he had no variability in his heart rate, and he wasn't pre-breathing. So they said, he needs to come out very quickly. We're going to prep you for an emergency C-section. And so we went from 0 to 60 very quickly of, being somewhat concerned to going, okay, well, I guess this is happening. So I was 37 weeks pregnant when that happened. So, I was kind of like out of the premature phase of, like the check marks of like, oh, you make it past 20 weeks and, you have a viable pregnancy, and then you make it past, 36 weeks and you're thinking, great, like I'm not going to have a NICU stay.
Right.
And then, and so then at 37 weeks, I just had no idea that this could ever be a possibility. So they, started prep me for the C-section. The anesthesiologist came over and started talking about like how I might need to be put under, and the risks of like being intubated for me. And then I had a panic attack, and actually Max started moving more. So, that adrenaline shot through him. And they said, well, we don't think we're going to need to put you under, and we just need to get him out really quickly. So,
wow.
Yeah, it was kind of a crazy time.
What do you remember your panic attack like feeling or looking like to you when you were in that moment?
So for me, I mean, I just started, crying, and I just started shaking, and kind of breathing really fast. And I just remember being in the pre-op room, and them just saying we gotta move on this. But the anesthesiologist actually was extraordinarily calming. I don't know if that's just like tends to be the person
a prerequisite,
right? But honestly, I mean, I sent him like thank you notes afterwards because he was, everyone else obviously was prepping very, very quickly because this was an emergency situation now, and he just like stayed with me that whole time and calmed me down. He's like, I think it's going to be okay. I'm here with you every step of the way. And,
wow.
And just, it was just really, really impactful for, and then he, they were checking since I was constantly being monitored at that point. They're like, we don't think that we're going to have to put you under. So he's like, this is a good thing. And just, he was with me every step of the way. I mean, and my poor husband obviously was kind of like, he couldn't be there, I think, with his pre-op, and then they brought him in for, the actual C-section. And so, I got a spinal, which actually was great. That was a very easy part. That was not the case with my repeat C-section with my daughter a few years later, where everything else was fine. But certainly the spinal worked really well and quickly for Max. And he came out, let out a little cry, and then was immediately whisked to be intubated. The neonatologist was in the room. Everyone was prepared to have to, provide interventions right away. And we were just, happy to hear him cry, feeling like that was a good sign of life. He didn't need like CPR or, he needed to be intubated. But then I was thinking, okay, well, a lot of babies need help, breathing, like when they're born. I didn't understand that HIE existed, let alone what was happening to my baby. So that was definitely, a wild time. As I was in post-op, the neonatologist came over and he had said, Max has qualified for this cooling treatment, and I had delivered at a community hospital, so he needed to be transferred downtown to the highest level NICU for it. I had actually worked for the health system in marketing and communications, and one of the small projects that I had a chance to work on was a transfer protocol brochure, talking about the team that comes from the NICU to take babies to the high level NICU. So I felt very comfortable with the care that we were receiving. I had already worked with the head of the NICU on this brochure. So I knew that it was the same team that was going to be helping him down at the NICU coming to get him. It was wild though. It was like 1:00 in the morning when I delivered. And so, my husband actually followed Max's ambulance down. And then I called my parents at 3 a.m. to say, hey, congratulations. But, oh, by the way, can you come and be with me in the hospital and then transfer, follow my ambulance when I get transferred down as well. So it was kind of a crazy, the start of a wild ride for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And your husband left, you were there by yourself. And how soon after were you able to get to go see your son?
So I was transferred down about 2 hours after Max was. My parents lived very close, so they were able to get there the same time, like essentially the same time as Mike had to get in the car to go down in the ambulance. So it was kind of like I wasn't alone, which was really nice.
Yeah.
Um, and then I didn't get to see Max until hours and hours after that because he needed a lot of interventions once he arrived at the NICU. He required the oscillator. They were really afraid that they couldn't get him to stay on the oscillator. So it was a very precarious time. They thought they were going to lose him at that point. We didn't know that until a little bit later, but he certainly, they were able to, get him a little bit more stable and into the cooling treatment.
Mm. So there's like a couple things that I have questions about. One is, how were you getting all this information relayed to you? Was it like a nurse that would come see you and give you updates? Was your husband going back and forth? How does that work?
Yeah, it was mostly my husband. So,
Okay.
at that time we had Blackberries.
Yeah.
So they were
Yeah.
going back and forth with text. And then now we look at the pictures and they're very granular.
Yeah.
But certainly, he was texting me updates. I was, in the ambulance, getting text updates from him. So it wasn't, there was just constant flow of information when he knew something. And then when I arrived, he came to my room and I was right by the NICU. I was the first room in postpartum outside of the NICU. So I was very close by.
And then you say cooling, and if you haven't ever worked in a NICU or been in the NICU before with your child, cooling is a specific protocol for these babies who experience some sort of brain injury, like HIE. And so how is it cooling explained to you, and how would you explain it to someone else?
So it was explained to us that and we didn't even really realize that it was neurological until later on in the week. But, it was explained to us that it was a treatment that would slow the body down and allow him to get, the necessary, processes to help him live and help him, through whatever was going on. So, we were told about the process that he would be, over several hours, be cooled down to 91 degrees. He would stay there for 72 hours and then he'd be gradually rewarmed. And then after rewarm, we'd get an MRI done to see if there was an impact. And I guess at that point, it just didn't dawn on us, I guess, even though there was an MRI that we were told about on the brain, that it would be something this significant. So I think, that's a total coping mechanism of, fight or flight. And we're just okay, well, whatever you say, we'll just fight it out.
Right. Like my child is in your hands. Like the answer is yes,
Yep.
just do what you have to do.
Yeah.
And you're also post-surgery, and this of course happens in the middle of the night. So sleep, which you probably haven't been doing if you're, have been counting kicks for the past week. So there's no wonder that there's that disconnect, and even more of a reason for, I think, healthcare providers to over communicate.
Absolutely. I mean, and for us, it was so moment by moment. So it was okay, we didn't even think ahead of, to the end of cooling. It was well, what are we doing in this moment, and what do we need him to do, and what is he doing? With so many of these babies, they're so up and down, and 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, or 1 step forward, 3 steps back. So for him, the first 48 hours were just a lot of ups and downs, trying to get his blood pressure right and get his breathing under control and things like that. And so for Max, they had, put an EEG on him, and they were concerned about the EEG. And we knew that, but we didn't know. They said, but don't worry about that until, he gets out of cooling. It might not, have anything. It might not actually, show what they're seeing, because he was also given, phenobarbital, which is a very powerful anticonvulsive because neonatal seizures are very common with HIE. Luckily, we didn't see any, clinical or subclinical or anything on the EEG with seizure activity. But, it does suppress the brain quite a bit. So you're not seizing, which, obviously has, it's like that for a reason with evidence-based care to, hopefully have better outcomes when you're not, when you're able to control the seizures or prevent them.
And I think another part of the NICU too, especially with cooling babies like Max, is you're not able to really touch or hold or even see his face because he's intubated and then his head is covered with EEG. So what was that like for you the first time you saw him?
Oh, very overwhelming. So yeah, he had leads everywhere. He was intubated. He had the EEG on. He had an umbilical line through his belly button that had all sorts of things going on, and then we're told you want to keep all stimuli very low because you don't want to exacerbate any pain that he could feel, which is so counterintuitive to being a mom or a dad or a parent, is just this, you want to protect your child and you want to touch them and cuddle with them and reassure them, even, this little infant. And we were told that, touching might exacerbate pain during cooling. So
yeah, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah,
to your loving brain. Yeah,
and it's yeah. So then our question was well, what can we do? And I will say, and this is something I think so many people have taken this in so many wonderful ways in the past several years. And our team was fantastic. They're well, here's what you can do. You can, sing to him in a quiet, a quieter voice and, see if he'll tolerate, you just stroking his hand. And now I've learned so much more of, how babies act. And, there's so many great people out there that are sharing fantastic, educational information about, how newborns act, and in particular, HIE babies or preemies and their cues of, the don't touch me or, what's too much or what's not enough. And so, our team was pretty good with making sure that we were aware of those things. And then also, they were encouraging me to pump. So that was something I could do. So when he could, try foods because he was, not being fed at that point because that's, typically standard during cooling is they're either on TPN or there's nothing going on during cooling as far as nutrition goes. So it's, there's just a lot of complexities and then just, trying to take care, the staff was great. They were, encouraging us to take care of ourselves and eat and sleep and all of that. And just kind of ride it out and see where things would go. And, luckily Max, after, on his third day of cooling was doing really so much better. It was a big turnaround. He was able to be extubated. And then he started opening his eyes a little bit too. So that was really profound, to see that there were improvements going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to hear more about kind of the waking up process and what that was like for you. But in those first few days when he was intubated and there wasn't a lot that you could do as far as interaction wise, what kind of role did you take? Did you like to be in the room all the time, or did you feel better almost like going back to your room and being able to relax because it was really stressful being there? And I ask this only because I know the answer is that there is no right answer, and whichever way works for you is the good one. But I'm just kind of curious about what was good for you in those first few days.
Yeah, I was recovering from a C-section, so anyone that's gone through that, it's major surgery. Getting up and moving around is super important to recovery. So I was trying to get up as much as I could to do that and kind of balance spending time with Max in the NICU and then going back to my room and kind of either resting or getting up and taking those steps and working on recovery and really kind of challenging myself, not too much, but to get up and move. So that way, throughout that process, I could, be on my way to recover so I could be healthy for him too. So was kind of a mix of, how things were going, of how we kind of approached the situation of, trying to rest, but, we really wanted to be bedside as much as possible. But also recognizing that, in that state, we could take breaks as well and be there.
We'll be right back. We are sponsored by Magic Mind. I am such a coffee person. I enjoy the taste and the smell in my morning routine. But the truth is, I go beyond that 1 cup of Morning Joe, and my 2 to 3 day cup habit is expensive and not that effective in the long run. Thankfully, Magic Mind has come into my life. It's a small green shot-sized drink of all natural ingredients like adaptogens to decrease stress, nootropics to boost blood flow and cognition, and unlike regular energy drinks, Magic Mind has minimal caffeine, all of which comes from matcha. After a few days in a row of drinking Magic Mind, I notice I have less brain fog and feel more productive without an afternoon slump. You can try it and get 20% off Magic Mind by going to magicmind.co/childlife and using code CHILDLIFE. So Max he's extubated, which is huge, which means he's breathing on his own or, with less support than he was before. And he opens his eyes and what kind of expectation did you have from moving forward once that happened?
I mean, that was a huge milestone for him, right? Or inchstone, as we call them, especially in the HIE community. But yeah, I mean, and poor kiddo, like in a lot of things, especially anyone, whether that's a baby or adult or anyone across the spectrum, if you're going through something as serious as this, they like people and babies get puffy, right? Like they retain fluid and things like that. So he, and I've seen some kids that this is very common in the cooling, and some kids that they don't puff out as much, but he definitely had a lot of edema and swelling. So his little eyes, like, he was trying to open them through this like swollen face, and he was just like this sweet little creature. So, again, we couldn't hold him yet. I love to see that there's advances for HIE families to be able to hold babies during cooling in some way. But we didn't have that option, which was okay. But it was just wonderful to see him start to do more typical baby things that you would expect, kind of wrinkling his body and moving his extremities and things like that. So yeah, we were getting, a little bit more excited and seeing like, okay, well, these are good signs. And again, like staying in the moment and not trying to get too far ahead of where, why this happened or, what this could mean for his life and our life. I remember there's so many thoughts that I think are normal that people might be embarrassed about. I mean, I'll tell you with my own thoughts. I remember sitting there at many times during cooling and thinking like, am I going to lose my baby? Is this best if I lose him? Is he going to have a life of pain and suffering? Like what is going to go on with this? And I think just going back to grounding myself and being okay with the fact that these thoughts were normal. And it's trauma. Like you're going through a traumatic situation. It's a life or death situation with your baby that you would never expect to go through. And I think parents hold a lot of guilt sometimes for a lot of those thoughts, but they're perfectly normal to go through while you're in that situation.
Yeah, thank you for saying that out loud. Because I think there are a lot of parents who think then, and they're like, oh, how could I even, imagine it's totally normal, like you're saying, to kind of go through this spectrum of extreme hope and then extreme loss and preparing yourself and everywhere in between.
Yeah. And some moments like the NICU, like I said, can be just such a roller coaster. So some moments you're really hopeful, some moments you're more terrified,
yeah.
And so, things were going well. But then we started talking, with the neonatologist of saying, well, after he is warmed up, we'll see some kids have a really hard time during warm up where his levels might go all sorts of crazy again with, blood pressure and things like that. And breathing, he might need breathing support again, more than just the nasal cannula. And so his rewarm was actually quite uneventful, thankfully. And then the next day, we went through the MRI and he had to be reintubated for that because you have to be really still for the MRI. So that was a whole different process. An MRI day is really kind of a sentinel event in the HIE NICU experience. I think we've had a lot of growth with how communication happens with families over the past nearly decade since I've been around in the community. Whereas it used to be this really make it or break it moment where, they'd say, well, we'll find out more of, basically like this prognosis that, could come out of the MRI. And really an MRI is a picture in time, there are so many kids that, do so much better than their MRI. There's kids that have different impacts where their MRI might have looked like there was less damage on it, or a normal MRI and still have impacts. I mean, it really varies. And so, how it's talked about and that it's one piece of the puzzle, but not the whole puzzle, is really important, for clinicians to communicate with families, because a lot of times, sometimes there's just too much stock put into that as being the only picture.
Oh, gosh. Yeah. Well, it's kind of the first inside look into what physically is, happening inside that we can't see on the outside. So there's a lot of stake, but like you're saying, it is absolutely just the first picture and not the picture of a long, long list of things that, can impact or not impact. I love that recognition. And I think that's really important for clinicians to hear. So thank you for saying that.
Absolutely. And there's, three kind of things that are talked about with like different severities of HIE. And one is, there's the SARNAT scale, which has been around forever. And some families might not even be given a SARNAT, rating or whatever. And that's because it's typically used at birth or at time of injury to assess what, interventions the baby might qualify for. And then you have the MRI level, like what do you see on an MRI, and typically, you're told it's either normal, mild, moderate, or severe, to impacts to, could be the entire brain, parts of the brain. And then there's also the clinical outcome, right? And so that's, really what is most treated. So for us, Max is doing very well on that, when he was going to be intubated to have the MRI, he was moving around more. They were excited to start, seeing how feeds would go after his MRI. So his MRI came back with a moderate to severe injury to the frontal, occipital, and parietal lobes. And we were devastated. His team was devastated. Everyone thought that based on his clinical presentation, his MRI would have been better. And like I said, I think, what happens next is really important with how that's communicated. So we were all hoping that it would look differently. But we had his neurologist come in and kind of talk to us about it and say, this is what could happen, but this could also not happen. And that it's really hard to give an accurate prognosis, especially when you're in this moderate to severe area where things just aren't necessarily super clear and they're not necessarily correlating to what you see clinically. So, Max, like I said, was starting to, really kind of improve a lot. And so they said, babies' brains are very plastic and they are, have a high water content. They're fresh brains, so even if there is an injury, that doesn't mean that their potential, we don't know what their full potential might be. So, we were told that he's at risk. He was at risk for, cerebral palsy and intellectual disabilities based off his MRI. But they said, that could also not come to pass. So, they said the biggest thing is to, when we go home, get him into early intervention therapies and give him life experiences and just love him, and which I think is a tall order for families who want to, get in kind of okay, something's wrong. Now I want to fix it, and it's which I think is a normal human response as well. But, that can also be such a detriment to your mental health and to your family's mental health as well. There's a lot of implications with that as well.
Oh gosh, yeah, it's having to adjust your way of thinking from the way you've always seen it and what your picture what you pictured birth was going to be like, and the grieving of all of that. And it's a struggle that I'm sure takes a lot of time to be able to adjust to.
Yeah. I mean, and it's, it's like not how you expected birth to go. It's now you've called into question how you expected family memories to be made. Right. And so, a lot of people don't have before this experience, any interaction with people in the disability world. They, have their own idea perhaps. And there's a lot of really negative stigmas out there of disability. So, and the unknown is scary. You don't know what, there's no crystal ball for these kids. But, I think lemonade out of, this very difficult, basket of lemons that people are handed, potentially depending, what you could say across whatever the clinical and MRI pictures look like, is that there's other people that have been there. And that knowledge and that support of kind of lighting the way for others is.
Yeah. So how did Max kind of end up, and what happened after that MRI and you got that prognosis? I know that he had to figure out a few things before you could get home, which is the breathing completely on his own and eating and getting everything set up. And what was that part of the journey like for you guys, the going home after all those things were accomplished?
Yeah. So Max was in the NICU for a total of 3 weeks. And which in NICU time, when you look at a lot of other families may seem short. But I think, anytime you spend in the NICU is very difficult.
Yes.
So for Max, after the MRI, we finally got to hold him, which was, I just remember feeling this whole, it was very overwhelming. We had just heard all these things that had called into question so many of our hopes and dreams for our new baby that we were holding now. And then just going, wow, what do we do next? How is this going to go? So Max they started him on feeds that night. And he did very well. And over the weekend, he just kept improving. His oxygen needs were less. It took him about another week to a week and a half to get off oxygen completely. And he was a little sluggish to feed. So, there was a lot of pressure to breastfeed and he would tire out really quickly and it was very, very stressful. So, I just opted to continue pumping and trying to feed him with the little, NICU bottles. And that was what worked well for us. Just because it was just too stressful to just keep, trying and feel, it just felt so overwhelming to me.
Yeah.
And you're in the situation where you're around all these other families and it can just get, like I said, very, very overwhelming. It's very traumatizing.
Oh, there is nothing that is relaxing about breastfeeding for the first time in the NICU with a baby who has just had a brain injury. No, that's really difficult.
Yeah. So, and like I said, everyone was very well meaning. They really wanted to see us, succeed. But for me, I think that was like one of my first moments of self-advocacy for this, was just saying, nope, this is not working for me.
Yeah.
This is not working for us. We're going to figure out what is going to work to make sure that he's getting what he needs. And I don't feel like a train wreck trying to get him what he needs,
Yeah. How empowering to be able to make that decision finally. It's like every other decision has been made for you and Max, and this is one you could make.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, he went down to the step down unit about a week before discharge. And that was a big change. We had less support, because you have, in the NICU we were in, there were 2 big bays when you were in the step down unit, as opposed to smaller pods of 4 babies. So actually that felt overwhelming to me, that change. And my husband went back to work. So that was a big, after 2 weeks. So that was a big change and felt very lonely and isolating. And I remember one day I was just bawling and the nurse came over to me and she was like, what's upsetting you? You have so many things to be happy about right now. And I was like, yes, but I'm feeling, it's kind of like that delayed response of I'd been just coping and plowing through in crisis mode, and then had a moment to just like, let it all out. And I was like, I know that we're doing better and Max is doing better, but I'm feeling very isolated and alone in this. And like, I remember I'd asked the social worker rounded, and I said, is there anyone you can connect me to? Like, Max is like the only non-preemie that's like in this NICU. And we just went through this crazy time with cooling, and I've not seen or heard of anyone else going through this. And they were telling me not to Google, things like that. So I was trying to be dutiful about that. But it was just overwhelming. And they were like, no, we don't really have anyone to connect you to. And so I just took a mental note of that. And I was like, okay, well, that needs to change.
Yeah. Yes.
So, so after, 3 weeks, Max was, he had gained enough weight. He was feeding, at the targets I wanted him to. And so, he had been off oxygen for a few days and was able to hold his own very easily and steadily at that point. So that, about 3 weeks, we were able to come home.
Wow. And how is kind of just moving forward from going home, which is its own thing? Gosh, I feel like each step of the NICU experience, especially for HIE parents, deserves its own podcast episode. But so you took Max home. We see a picture of you now being the executive director of a nonprofit with 2 kids. I mean, how can we even go through from going home to where you are now? But what would you say? Could you give us a little cliff notes and what has really helped you throughout that journey, that part?
Absolutely. So for me, there were questions when I was discharged, when Max came home, that I needed answered. I needed to know if there were other families that had been through this and where are they? Would we be okay? And okay to me was answering the question, can I have more children? Because I didn't know what had caused this.
Yeah.
Can my marriage survive? Because I had heard statistics of families of parents who raised children with disabilities and that their, divorce rates were abysmal. And can I maintain a career? Because that was important to me. I had a career in marketing, communications, and healthcare. And I wanted to see different families with different outcomes and if anyone was able to make all these things happen. So I did go home and Google, and because there was nothing handed to us about HIE or support or anything when we discharged, and having worked in the health system writing patient education materials, I was like, well, this needs to change. Like, this can't happen again to other families. And I could only imagine that I was not the only person in the world that this was going to happen. Or this was happening to. And so,
Betsy, it's all starting to make sense for me because I work in our NICU here in Austin, and I have this beautiful box of the most beautiful marketing materials and pamphlets and cups and little teddy bear. And so it's all making sense now. Okay, keep going.
So I went home and I Googled, and I found 3 families that all pointed me to Hope for HIE, the Facebook group at the time. And all 3 had different outcomes with their kids. All 3 were married at the time. All 3 were pregnant or had just had their pregnancy after HIE. And all 3 were working in a career. And I was like, okay, check. So whatever we might be headed towards, life can be okay. And then they connected me to, at that time, about 200 families worldwide. And so the common storyline with everyone was similar to me. I was in the NICU. I felt very isolated. There was no connection. And I stumbled upon Hope for HIE on Facebook. And the original founders of the group had always had this dream to make it a nonprofit and reach more families and work on improving the quality of life, big goals of, improving the quality of life for children and families and decreasing the incidence of HIE. But we had to start at the very basics of, we need people to know that this amazing community exists and that peer-to-peer support is important for families, because that's where I got my questions answered. That's where you don't even know what questions to ask so many times. So that's where, like, I have an upcoming appointment. What should I ask? This is what I'm seeing. Should I ask about this? Is there something I'm missing? You want to be prepared. And so that became my lifeline. And then there was a group of us that came together in 2013 after the founders had said, we don't have the time to commit to moving this forward. And we said, all right, well, let's see where we can plant the flag. And because we had a worldwide group, and I had a very wonderful friend who volunteered to do some pro bono work for us to legally get us established. So we planted the ground in West Bloomfield, Michigan, of all places. And, several years later now, we have grown our forums and our reach to serve over 7,000 families and connect researchers and clinicians. And, as you mentioned, we, in 2019, we had a real big surge of growth. We, started implementing our newly diagnosed support boxes. We at first just developed a simple trifold and tried to get that out as much as we could, just as a starting point, and my work in healthcare prior with learning how physicians work was really kind of a starting point. But we had so many talented people in the community that wanted to make this happen and have helped us grow and have amazing skill sets to lend. So over the past, I'd say 2.5 years, we've had a real significant period of growth where we are now into that, real in depth of supporting the families and connecting families, and then working very collaboratively with many incredible clinicians and researchers who really care about our community too.
Yeah, I mean, I just have to applaud you because your organization is pristine. It is so resourceful. It's approachable. I love it top to bottom, and giving it the resource to families and just talking about Hope for HIE is huge. So thank you for all of you've done, and how you've done it, I don't know. I would love to hear about how Max is now and what you guys are up to and what he enjoys and what makes you guys happy as a family.
Absolutely. So Max is now 9. He's in 4th grade, which is unreal. But he is, I like to say, is living his best life every day. He does have impacts from his HIE. He has mild cerebral palsy. He has a mild vision impairment. So he has like some accommodations and supports at school, but he's doing amazingly well. And we did actually add epilepsy to his list of diagnoses last year, which we thought we had escaped. So that was kind of a bummer. But we're, taking the next plot twist in life and trying to move forward and, just manage it as best we can. Like I mentioned before, we added Emily to our family 5 years ago, almost 6 years ago. And we just, try to, live our life, make wonderful family memories, clear out barriers that might exist for Max, help him self-advocate and learn how to self-advocate. I learned a ton. I was very fortunate. My mom's cousins had a son. He's now, I think my cousin Justin is 33 now, and he was born premature and has spastic quad CP. So to me, CP wasn't as scary. I knew if there was going to be some barrier that his parents really showed us, Mike and I in particular, what's possible with a physical disability. So we were very lucky early on to have a lot of really good mentors. And, so we have just tried to do our best to have Max, get his interests going and support his interests. So he loves playing basketball. He's been on a baseball team the past several years. He loves Harry Potter. He loves telling jokes. Like, he's really into puns. So he has a really funny sense of humor. And he's just a great kid, and he gets into trouble just like any other kid. And, like, he and Emily love each other and have a wonderful sibling dynamic, and they drive each other crazy too. And it's all great. There's hard times, of course, but, we have adapted to this life, and we'll continue with whatever gets thrown at us, and continue forward and hope that we can help other families, feel that. I mean, really, the HIE families that we're connected to, inspire me every single day. Like the creativity, the perseverance, just they're really incredible people to be connected to and see how they, build their lives to make memories and live out, their family joys and things like that.
I love that. And I'm not surprised at all by that because I've had the same experience working with HIE families, and I only get to see them really at the beginning of their journey. And I'm already inspired daily. If people want to follow along with you or Hope for HIE, where can they do that?
Absolutely. So we are on several different platforms on social media, and then our website. So you can sign up for our newsletter, see what we're up to with events and things like that on our website, which is hopeforhie.org. Or if there's any NICUs that want to get our support materials to hand out, we have that on our website as well for requesting materials. We'd love to work with more NICUs and make sure that families are supported from the onset of diagnosis. And then, anything that has an @ we're Hope for HIE.
I love it.
Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, even dabbling in TikTok nowadays. So, there's a lot of different places to be, and we're trying to be on all of them at least a little bit to, reach out and make sure people are connected.
And spread awareness, and you're doing that. So thank you so, so much for giving your personal and both professional experience and making such a difference for families.
Well, thank you so much again for having me and for all the work that you do to support families. It's a team. It's a team effort.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Betsy.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Child Life On Call podcast. I'm your host, Katie Taylor, and you can follow us at Child Life On Call on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Please rate and review to make it easier for other families to find us. We have cute merch available at www.bonfire.com/store/childlifeoncall, and you can listen to more episodes and find resources at childlifepodcast.com.